It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement? And who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
From a surface view, as England fans, it'd be fair to say that it's a mixed bag right now. Brilliant wins against Ireland, followed by close run matches against France, combined with the new guys coming through, have led to optimism, whilst close losses against New Zealand over the summer, in games that were winnable, have all in all resulted in a report card of not bad at all. But when you add on the autumn internationals and the 3 out of 4 losses that were experienced by England, it's quite evident to say that it may have dropped in terms of optimism for many, many fans. The agonising thing is that they were in these games, were it not for a ball's length wide penalty miss and a botched restart catch, which in turn led to an unlikely but well manipulated Aussie try. England are talking about a fairly respectable autumn, but instead, they're actually talking about 5 out of 12 games won, and Steve under pressure from critics and friends alike. Now the fallout has scared me, as the criticism has mainly been around England's blitz defence, with calls for abandonment and knee-jerk reactions. Now, rather than joining in or adding to this debate, as panic helps no one, I often go back to a life lesson I learnt many years ago from a film, Bridge of Spies.
I have a mandate to serve you. Nobody else does. Quite frankly, everybody else has an interest in sending you to the electric chair.
All right.
You don't seem alarmed.
Would it help?
Do you never worry?
Would it help? My people are going to shoot me.
Yes. You're not worried.
Would it help?
I've often found that the knee-jerk reactions and the overreactions are highly emotive, and therefore are just noise, distracting us from what we should be asking. Steve put forward a lot of points in relation to England's performances over the autumn, and if we really listen and reflect on what was said, we get an idea of what's going on behind the scenes and why England lost these games, and where in particular they fell short. One area that they fell short that's quite evident is the last 20. Going into the last 20 of many of these games, England were not only in contention, but actually winning, and in some cases winning really well before ultimately, in the end, losing the game. Now, I have my suspicions as to why they lost, but if I actually knew, I'd be stood up on stage with these guys charging 5k an hour on the motivational speech market to CEO-type suckers. Remember, I'm not a fly on the wall. Everything I say is educated guesswork, essentially. However, the last 20 causes that I believe were to blame were the defensive toll and conditioning, the bench impact, and the media-acquired psychological pressure of the last 20. Now today, we're going to be mainly talking about the demands of the defence system, and how I believe it needs to adapt. The demands of the English defence system are many, not only physical, but mental. The amount of decision making that goes into it for each individual player, the acceleration to blitz off the line, make the tackle, get back on side, and then go again, over and over and over in many phases. It is extremely demanding, and it is exceptionally exhausting. Now, Steve had this covered, because in the Allied waters he had the guy who'd run the South African S&C department for 3 years, earning a World Cup winners medal and designing many drills and ways to improve his players' fitness to this defence. In Felix Jones, they had a brilliant coach who knew this defence inside and out from his time with South Africa, and who could coach it to an international standard, which he did. You see, Steve wanted, and still wants, this defence. This defence won 2 back-to-back World Cups, and in Felix and Allied, he had the two guys who could bring it to the England team. But this wasn't to be for long. In autumn 24, England were dealt a hammer blow when both of them left for pastures new. I cannot begin to say how bad it was for England to lose these guys, but in particular Felix Jones. Though the PR has been smooth, it would have caused absolute upheaval. In losing Felix Jones, Steve had lost the coach responsible for a defence that had kind of come to be known as England's identity, with that rapid out-to-win blitz being arguably the hallmark of the team. It was only 8 games into its development, but as we may remember from Wibble Rugby the New England way, this defence takes way more than 8 games to get right due to the complexities in it. It took the Boks 14 games, with Nienaber estimating an initial 18 games. Felix also claimed it was a work in progress, with a similar time frame required for England to become attuned to the principles within it. So when Felix handed in his notice, tons of people were asking what was the plan. Jamie George actually reveals that here.
We're very proud of our defence. We massively believe in the system that we have. I think there's going to be, some clips that are difficult to watch back because we needed to be more physical and make our tackles more. And if we do that, then our defensive system becomes a lot easier.
The indisputable fact is that this system over the autumn in spells did its job. This system is designed to put skill sets under pressure, to cut down time and space, to pressure key decision makers in A, and force knock-ons and generate intercepts. This in turn allows England opportunities at turnover attack and chances to get upfield, which, as we know from Wibble Rugby the New England way, I'm assuming you've watched it, is their main objective. But whilst it most certainly has shone in spells over the autumn, it has also fallen short in terms of familiarity, execution, and positioning. The main reason for this is familiarity, but it all comes back to that autumn hammer blow. When Felix and El-Abd delivered that fateful news and departed, I was at quite a loss. That whole day and the next day, I was literally contemplating and thinking who could we get. Now for me, there was really only one option that I wanted, and that was Norman Laker, defence coach of the Stormers. I know of the Stormers' defence, I know of their system, and I actually went on record the next day on X to talk about Norman Laker and say I want him. This is the guy that I want to get, because he's the only one I could really see who could continue and make this defence better on the trajectory that England need. The reason I wanted to get him so badly is the defence used by South Africa and brought to England under Felix Jones is basically the Stormers' system. The Stormers' defence is designed to deliver slow ball at all costs, prizing technique and physicality in the contact area whilst cutting down space and shutting down the second receiver with an out-to-win blitz with a ride or die scramble in behind. It prizes width, with those wide adjusting defenders being able to shoot in and cut down multiple options with a very simplified view on defence. So, 1 month later, when the shortlist for England defence coach was released, it had 3 names on it. Former defence coach Paul Gustard, Oyonnax's head coach and old mate of Steve's, Joe El-Abd, and Norman Laker. And I was so happy. Norman Laker had worked with Jacques Nienaber, he'd worked with Erasmus, he knew this system, he knew the drills, he knew the ways it worked, and therefore he would be able to continue England's development with it. However, he is also very good friends with Felix Jones, and therefore he didn't take it. This was gutting, because he's one of the only coaches available I believed who could take it forward, and to not get him was therefore highly frustrating. You see, Steve knows that this defence has proved highly effective and is very popular with the players. Multiple players from George Furbank to Henry Slade and Marcus Smith have gone on record saying this defence is brilliant and they want to continue with it and keep developing it even though Felix is gone. This enthusiasm and commitment showed the pride and passion England players had in their defence, and therefore it was a bit of a snafu for Steve Borthwick because he needed to keep developing it. But therein lied the problem. Steve needed to get people in who could develop it further, which meant a new S&C coach, who they couldn't get as the Prem clubs called conflict of interest, and a defence coach who could coach this exceptionally specialised defence. And this in turn was the problem. Felix Jones wasn't available, Jacques Nienaber's at Leinster, Dwayne Vermeulen would never do it, and Norman Laker said no. As such, with only 6 weeks to go before he needed a defence coach, Borthwick needed to find someone who could coach it, which heavily specialised so he couldn't. So 2, he needed to find someone who'd be willing to coach it. That he could potentially do. And lastly, this person would need to learn it and start coaching it all within a month. I hope this illustrates the levels of stress and pressure Steve would have been under after Felix resigned. Steve could only achieve 2 of his objectives, and as such he chose someone who could also stop the perceived evolving exodus door of coaches in hiring his old mate, best man, and also brilliant coach, Joe El-Abd. Not many people have actually mentioned that Joe is actually a really good coach. He will be able to learn this system, but on top of that, he will also be able to implement and understand the mechanisms that are needed to evolve this defence. It will take longer than if they'd hired Laker, there's no doubting that. But in these very unique circumstances where he lost key coaching staff, Steve actually did pretty well. Joe has been hired to take this defence and evolve and develop it to become a World Cup winning defence, but for England. He's got some important next steps to take, but what are they? Well, let's show you. It's a long one again, so grab a cup of tea, sit back, and hopefully enjoy it. Now, the blitz defence employed by England is derived from the South African Stormers defence that we spoke about in Wibble Rugby, the New England way. I highly recommend if you hadn't, you watch this video, because otherwise the next 50 minutes or so may get confusing. But if you're determined to carry on, this is a brief kind of overview. As seen against New Zealand, it is a strong out-to-win defence, led by the 13 with the tight 5 in around the ruck, the back row a little bit further out, and the backs on the edges. The contact area around the ruck is designed to be a battle, with the blitz designed to apply pressure on the second receiver, who if he gets it outside the umbrella, activates the scramble defence underneath to snuff out the threat. Counter-rucking and spoiling of the opposition ball in the wide channels is absolutely crucial, and the spacings of the adjusting defenders or the wide men is also highly key. We'll explain why later, but as can be seen, the All Blacks are forced to kick as they haven't gone anywhere, and it shows that even 8 games in, the defence was proving highly effective. It was fulfilling Felix's desire to place skill sets under pressure, to get up fast and force knock-ons with which they could get upfield via kick or carry, to generate intercepts which launched transition attack. Even under Joe, this continued in the autumn, be it forcing knock-ons in the tackle, forcing passes under pressure which result in intercepts, and again, going back to their blitz defence, forcing knock-ons which get them upfield set-piece positions. Now, there were problems. There were going to be problems as they're still learning this defence. There were problems under Felix, and it continued into the autumn because there were still problems evidently under Joe. As we are talking about what needs to adapt, however, we are primarily talking about the autumn. Now, the 3 main areas that needed improvement were ruck defence, connection, particularly in the D4-13 channel, and not setting wide enough. Now, it should be evident that I am fully behind the blitz defence, and I can understand why a lot of people out there have said that we need to temper it, and there are certain situations where it needs to adapt. But one hill I will die on is that when you have numbers and width, the all-in blitz is king. This full speed out-to-win blitz is the key hallmark of a Jacques Nienaber defence and is known as hammer with England or kill with the Springboks. The general rule with England's hammer defence is if you have 6+ men, you blitz. You go all out blitz if you have 6 or more men in the defensive line. This is because of the width in your line that 6+ men provides. This is the hallmark of the English team that Felix introduced, but it is not the finished product, namely with structure and familiarity with it. I guarantee you this try is not scored next year when England get more competent with this defence. Unfamiliarity and positioning cost England this try. Issues that exist as England are only 12 games into using and learning this defence. That's not even mentioning a huge change in coach who is still learning it. Of course there will be issues. If a coach who's been coaching it since 07 believes it will take 18 games to learn, why are we surprised when within 12 games there are still issues? However, a key development England need to do that I believe Felix would have done had he stayed on, and was definitely passed to Joe in the handover, is the same thing that Jerry Flannery is doing with the Springboks D, which is making it more adaptable. Making this defence more adaptable is what I believe is the main objective of Joe El-Abd in 2025. In this endeavour, he's following Jacques Nienaber, who, though the biggest advocate of the blitz out there and knew it would take 18 games to achieve, knew that his defence had to adapt situationally to different scenarios. Now, the awareness for the Springbok D to not just blitz, but to come up and hold, waiting for the activation of the next layer of attack, is all driven by intelligent decision-making. Namely, the decision-making of Blue Steel and Lekanyo Am, the Springbok 13s. The physical makeup and decision-making ability of the 13 is key to this system working. You see, in a Stormers defence system, the 13 is key. He's an adjusting defender, but he has to have the physical attributes to be able to blitz, drift, turn on a swivel, and activate the kill option that we see here, whilst being agile enough to join that scramble under the shoot option if needed. The 13 being instrumental in the Stormers' D has been the case ever since Nienaber was defence coach, with the main reason due to the Stormers' defence of the 13 channel. This is down to the spacings of the Stormers' defence in the wide channels. This is characterised by the huge 13 channel, shown here by the arrow. This is a key Jacques Nienaber hallmark and introduced to England by Felix Jones as well. This is further illustrated with England, with the arrows indicating the 13 channel, essentially defended by Henry Slade and Faye Waboso. Now the reason they set this wide is that it significantly increases clarity for the adjusting defenders, whilst also placing a massive onus on their decision making. By setting wide and jamming in, they have a much wider vision of the line, allowing for simultaneous ball watching and man watching, meaning they can adjust their line far easier, not only driving carriers back to their team's pack, but also cutting down second receivers who can unlock the wide men. But for this to work, the out-to-in principle of this defence is critical. I cannot stress highly enough how much you must remember this. The defenders must always set up outside their man. Here, Jesse Creel has two options, the jack option in Mark Wilson, and the second receiver option or flash in Henry Slade. Now what I want you to focus on is the narrowness of the angle between these options. The angle is so narrow that Creel can adjust his line to hit either man without massively decelerating and losing speed. Creel can blitz this rapidly on the release of the second pass, as the box have 6+ men, and therefore can run kill, shutting down the second receiver knowing his inside is covered. But therein lies the issue. Say they don't have width and numbers. In that case, the defensive captain in the 13 needs to adapt. Here, Creel realises that England could get wide and stops his blitz. He instead holds for Slade's short option and releases Yantyi to take the second receiver. In holding his depth, he has the space to drift under Yantyi's blitz, joining a pre-scramble in case England get wide. Now, this was a brilliant case of situational defence, which requires intelligent players like Creel who can recognise when the blitz is on and when they need to buy time for the cover defence and be a little softer. Now, while this will be a bit of a generalisation as we can't go over every scenario, we are going to show the differences between these two approaches. The first is the blitzy 13, or when there's no major wide channel threat and therefore the 13 can apply pressure. From the line-out strike, we can see the trademark wide Stormer spaces between the tackler and adjusting defenders. Now off a 6+1 line-out, New Zealand throw to Barrett and form a dummy maul before spinning it wide with Smith as first receiver and Barrett as second. Barrett gets the pass under pressure away to Crotty, striking the 13 channel, who was taken very effectively by Yantyi in that edge delivery system out to win blitz, pushing him into Dialende where he can jackal. Now, rewatching this again, I want you to pay careful attention to the actions of Jesse Creel, particularly his blitz and the way he tries to get up to pressure Barrett and put pressure on that passing lane in particular. Barrett is the second receiver. This is the 13's job in the Stormer system to pressure him. This is done by waving arms to block the pass, getting high to cut Barrett back inside by tackling him, but even if they don't achieve this, Creel knows Yantyi will handle any threat should the ball get outside of him by forcing him back in that out-to-win blitz. Now that's the blitzy 13 approach, but as we know, the drifty 13 approach is employed when there is a wide threat. The set that we use to show you this is one of the best defensive sets I've ever seen and is well worth this applause. Now, off a scrum launch, New Zealand run their sweep move. This involves an M1 pass from the 10 over the 12 to Crotty, who takes the ball flat before passing behind to the 14 who releases Ioane. This move is meant to give Ioane an overlap, but instead it gives him a one-on-one and it gets a penalty against him. The reason behind this is key to remember, as the reason behind this is absolutely critical to the Springbok defence. This principle can be summed up as, if the breakout wide is on, then defensive width and the scramble is absolutely key. And that is that width is needed in the adjusting defenders as it's an out-to-win defence, and if this fails, the whole system can fail, as we show later. The actions of Creel here were exemplary. As shown, Creel was instrumental here in giving Colby this width. If we go through it from the top, this pass from Barrett here is key, as it changes the whole dynamic of the defence. The M1 causes Creel to react. If we go back and have a look from the top, this pass from Barrett gives the All Blacks potential attacking width, and as such Creel does not blitz. His objective now is to cover the crash option in Ben Smith, shown by him holding his depth and drifting, which in turn prompts Colby to drift out as well. This is key as Crotty's pass goes behind, but Colby's drift gets him outside Nholo, meaning he can make his out-to-in jam. The fact that he's positioned outside in a holo means he can tackle from the outside in, meaning Willie LaRue doesn't need to jam in, leaving him free to take Ioane. It is magnificent defence that with the activated scramble by Creel enables him to also generate a turnover penalty. Now, I cannot overstate how impressive this set-piece defence was, but one principle that it really shows is the connection and relationship between the 13, the outside centre, and the wingers. In this system, with the spacings, the winger always follows the lead of the 13's decision. Against England, we see an attack launched from the base of the maul. Now, 6, 10 and 12 here hold their depth, whilst Krill initiates line speed to shut down Marcus Smith as the second receiver. As we see, Curtly Aronson follows him in perfectly. Both have held their width, with Creel able to make an outside-in tackle on Smith and Curtly Aronson able to make an outside-in tackle on Stewart or Slightholme. Now, Slade hits up Lawrence on the short option, so none of them are needed, but we can see that every option here was covered. Width and numbers are key to this working, but so is the choice of the 13, which is why when Felix came in, he picked Henry Slade, the 13 of Exeter Chiefs and his defensive captain going forward. This was a highly astute choice, as in the start of the Felix Jones tenure, England actually did pretty well, especially post-Ireland, in their defence. Against New Zealand, a team that are renowned for their attacking, England only conceded 40 points, which when you consider the development stage of this defence was actually pretty good. Continuing on from the Six Nations, it resulted in many errors being forced, which led to good golden opportunities. Now, the reason that Slady was picked by Felix Jones to run this defence is because he knows this system very well. At Chiefs, Slady is the defensive captain of the system implemented by former Stormers assistant coach Omar Munamni. Munamni has worked with Ninaba and Erasmus, and knows the system very well. Hence here we see the Stormers principles in action, with Slady leading the blitz that Menife Roboso follows him on, eventually intercepting the ball and turning it over. As 13, Slady is key to this blitz. As a 13 in a Stormers system, he not only needs the physical characteristics in order to be able to change direction on a die and accelerate rapidly, but the intelligence to manage it as well. Now he has done this very well, with the club connection of him and Manife Roboso being instrumental to taking it forward to international level. Throughout all England games we've seen the benefit of that club connection, with Slady and Manny moving as one, looking like they're connected by string literally. If you look at their blitzing lines in particular, they're moving in unison. They start both moving out to in, but then literally straighten up as if together. The benefits of this club connection have been huge, but it can't just be with Manny, he has to have this connection with other wingers as well. Here, after New Zealand have moved wide, Slady is forced to jam in to take Mackenzie, and Mackenzie's offload actually finds Freeman, who if he hadn't jammed in unison with Slade, wouldn't make it. Now, before we continue, it must be said I'm not a fly on the wall. Remember, I'm not a fly on the wall, I can't see inside, and my opinions could be very, very wrong and treated as such. Now, from what I've heard through the grapevine, some love Omar for this approach and some don't like him as much. Regardless, he was since replaced by Hayden Thomas at Exeter. Now, this is pure speculation, but I believe Hayden Thomas is being groomed for an eventual role as England defence coach, with Joe El-Abd moving to the forwards. Now, this is guesswork, but you see, Hayden Thomas is the former England under-20s defence coach and heavily influenced by Omar Munimi's system. It is a very Stormers-esque system, albeit with a little bit more adaptability. It is no coincidence that Steve had him seconded to England A as defence coach, where you can see the Stormers' hallmarks all over the system, from the 13-channel spacings to the classic out-to-win adjusting defender blitz as seen here. Now, this is guesswork, but I would remember it as it does make a bit of sense. Now, getting back to England, it was clear that Slady's tutelage and time as defence captain at Exeter meant that he was naturally the best fit to lead this defence, with Hammer being a key staple. But Hammer always works best with that out-to-win hit. Felix would have stressed the importance of this, with multiple players, namely the tackler and adjusting defenders, arcing out to get to the outside shoulder of their man, therefore to make an out-to-win hit. Against New Zealand, we see Manife Roboso, one of England's most agile and fastest players, arcing out to get to the outside shoulder of his man so he can tackle from the out to in, therefore pushing that carrier back inside. If the ball does get outside, the next adjusting defender has to jam in, and Manny has to be agile enough to get out and cover him in case that's missed. This indicates why the tackler and adjusting defender have to be so agile and so fast. Players like Manife Roboso, Henry Slade, Tommy Freeman, Henry Arundel when he comes back, all of them are needed, because not only do they need to do this within the structure, they need to make the right decisions on turnover. As we saw in Wibble Rugby the New England way, this system has backups to backups to backups, with that blitz conducted with the scramble underneath. But sometimes, that blitz needs to happen even if there's no support to stop the try. In the under-20s final on 24, Johan Jones stops a certain try by applying pressure to the second receiver. Against New Zealand, they win back a kick and therefore are going up against an unstructured defence. As such, we see England fly out of the line with Tom Curry arcing out to get to the outside of Damien McKenzie and force him back in. Now, Tom does a really good job here and stops the ball getting wide, but if he didn't, Ollie Lawrence would have to jam in on McKenzie before he got the pass away. If he did get the ball away, he'd have to cover a former winger and one of the fastest men in the All Blacks, Rieko Ioane, and the speed men in Beauden Barrett and co out wide. This alone should indicate why it takes a certain type of player to be able to defend out here. The number of options that you have to cover is huge, and therefore getting McKenzie to go back inside may have saved a try for England. Now, as we've discussed, the spacings of the adjusting defenders out wide assist in this decision making it a lot easier for them visually to see what's going on and to shut down the second receiver. Now here, McKenzie has multiple options, with Tuipulotu and De Groot in the front line and Barrett and Ioane at the back. Now Smith on the inside can take Tuipulotu if the pass is given and not intercepted, and Papaili even though this passing lane is really not an option. Meanwhile, Mitchell also needs to be able to take Papaili in addition to Ioane or Barrett, which is aided as the angle to either one of them is so narrow. Now this also leads to the next part of this system, if the adjusting defenders are beaten. If they are beaten, then the scramble from the inside needs to come along and cover the break. Now during this series, New Zealand tried to stop these dynamics, both the scramble and defensive width. As you can see here, Ioane trucks it up and Barrett holds Earl, a key scrambler, on the floor to prevent him from getting up and joining the scramble. Next up, Finau blasts into Lawrence and Perifetta grabs Slade and takes him out of the game. He literally decks him. The reason being, they want to stop England getting defensive width, which they succeed at. As we can see, if we pause here, Slade is out of the defensive line. Thereby Manny can't get wider, which means that he can't jam in and make that out to in hit on McKenzie, because he's too narrow. As such, McKenzie, on a bit of an overs line, gets around him, meaning that Furbank has to jam in and take McKenzie, and thereby Manny Faye-Waboso joins the scramble behind the line. To be fair, this is a great recovery from England, but misjudgments can occur in this defence. Now on this occasion, New Zealand managed to get outside the adjusting defenders, thereby setting up a wide ruck on the left wing. They jack up off 9 and they set the ruck, but when they go wide, Slade blitzes up, with Fremo as per SOP following. This isn't on as McKenzie is too deep, meaning the M1 to Reese puts Reese outside Fremo, who if he had more depth could get to him. Finn Smith, who was angling out, misses the jam tackle, and as such, Reese makes the break. Players know they can make errors and misreads in this defence, because they know that their mates coming in the scramble are going to bail them out. It's even the case with South Africa. Even with their huge experience, they still make errors. Here, New Zealand get wide due to numbers, but even so, South Africa have 2 lines of scramble waiting to snuff out the attack. The point is that this defence takes time to learn. However, with Felix going in the middle of its development, Steve knew that he needed someone he trusted, and he got Joe in to take it forward. So let's show you what needs to be fixed and where Joe's taking the England defence. Now, even the most fanatical England supporter after the autumn would be a little bit justified in assuming that the results were a bit of a mixed bag. That's no shame because they are still developing, but it was a bit of a mixed bag. Now this goes for the defence too. In some games they actually had some awful defensive sets, whereas in other games they had some brilliant defensive sets that did exactly what they want their defence to do. The areas to improve over the autumn were the ruck defence, greater connection, and getting wider. Now these are very general, I'm aware of that, but that's because there's multiple subcategories within these. Now, I need to reiterate this. Some of the developments have already transpired and are already looking very good in terms of the advancement of this defence. As we can see, this set is probably one of the best sets in terms of defence throughout the autumn for me. Now, I don't believe it's perfect. Then again, this is my own interpretation, but I believe there could be a slightly more proactive attitude about reloading in particular, as well as slow ball. We do go into that later, but I believe the Kiwis got a little bit too much quick ball here. But all in all, this defensive pattern was good because there's numbers up against the attacking line at all times. The spacings are good. The first up tackles on the whole are good, though they do need to improve their reloading into the ruck defence here, as it was very slow and very lucky that Will Stewart came in when he did. Now, this is what I mean by reloading. Here we have Chandler Cunningham South slamming in as that adjusting defender to hit Tupovai and doing a great job dislodging the ball. But Ollie Lawrence, who was on his inside, should have been further out outside him, with Ben Spencer and Tommy Freeman in the backfield. Now, I won't complain against this because this was a massive hit that really, arguably, turned the momentum of this game in the first half. But this is being nitpicky. Regardless, it has worked very, very well in spells. But one area in particular that needs looking at is the ruck defence. Now, the ruck defence throughout the autumn has been porous, no pun intended. Now, this is quite an issue because if you remember Wibble Rugby the final, this was a very, very long time ago video. But this area around the ruck is critical to this defence. The forwards around here, being physically monstrous behemoths, are meant to slow the ball down. They have to make every ruck, every tackle an absolute battle because this defence does not work without slow ball. The goal is to turn every ruck that could be 2 seconds into 5+ seconds, completely removing the impetus from the attack and forcing 10s to just kick. And they do this with dominant athletes. Steve already has a healthy number of dominant athletes, but he's going for more. In Junior Kapoku, currently plying his trade in Racing 92, he has one. He can play lock and blindside flanker, is 19 stone and is still only under 20 years old. In George Martin, England have a player who can hit like a Springbok, according to Andre Pollard. All these players are physical monsters and they're what's needed for Joe to fix the main issue, which is the ruck defence. The ruck defence needs to be addressed. The ruck defence of South Africa is the key area from which they generate slow ball, which is the key staple underneath Naba. Now, to look into this in a little bit more detail, you're going to need to go to the final video because that has all the techers and the stuff that they actually do in terms of dark arts. But make no mistake, slow ball is key. Slow ball is the main principle behind Jacques Nienaber's defence and has been since his days at the Stormers. Now, I told you there'd be subcategories, and there are. The main areas to improve in the ruck defence are dominant collisions, communication and organisation, and counter-ruck selection. Now, unfortunately, the French in the 24 Six Nations really showed how ruck offence can hurt England. As you may remember, if you've watched the French attack video, the main principle in the French attack is to overwhelm the opposition at a particular place. This is something that Gaultier brought through from his Colomiers days and also time under Pierre Villepreux. Also known as the submerger, or black as it's really called, it's all about attacking the fringes of the ruck with rapid fire pick and goes, deception off the 9, inside balls and rapid offloads and handling to keep the pressure going through one singular point. It requires immense physicality from the forwards because it basically makes it a battle of attrition and is something that Felix Jones actually experienced in the England defence before Joe El-Abd did. This is classic French submerger play. They pick a channel on the field and they attack it over and over. They go through it with massive physicality, running scooting 9s and literally continually hit the same place with speed and numbers, over and over. England are so at 6s and 7s from this that George Ford is in the ruck defence. The only fix for this is slow ball, but Antonio clears Earl out before he even has a chance to jackal. The momentum is maintained, with Olivon going up Ford's channel and making quite a huge gain line, but here is where it gets really, really cunning. Marot has actually managed to slow up the ball, which in turn has cost France a little bit. The line is relatively set and England are making double tackles, but here is the crux. One of the tackles is missed. Now this, in turn, means that a counter-ruck happens, which doesn't get completed and takes more men out of the line. This opens space out the ruck and in turn allows go forward for the French. Legarrette passes to Flamand who goes up the guts, but here Tuffy Fanua changes everything. By controlling Slade, he wraps him back, which in turn means he can't get width, and this changes everything. Daly has his width, and in an ideal world is wide enough to take Olivon, seen highlighted in yellow, but because he has to come outside in, that means he's going to have to jam in on the running 9 because Slade's not here. This causes a chain reaction, with Legarrette drawing in Daly before offloading to Olivon, who draws the last adjusting defender in Smith before offloading to Barret, who goes over for the try. Now this was exceptional play, but it was all down to speed of ball and shithousery and physicality. Now this was very well worked by France, but with Joe's defence, it's something that we've seen in terms of the counter-rucking in the wide channels, which is a very good thing and should not be dropped. It just needs to be debated as to when it needs to happen. Because of the regathered kick, it should be noted this was against a slightly unstructured England defence, but even so, a few things happened here that compromised the ruck defence and therefore cost the try. You see, it should be noted it was from good intentions that this kind of happened. Stewart goes into counter-ruck to slow the ball, which removes him from the pillar position. Genji, who was at post, is now pillar, and Martin, who was at post, is now key. This completely changes their roles in the ruck defence, which not only leads to disorganisation, but also leads to an undermanned fringe, meaning Williams with his speed is able to take the gap, go through, and therefore gets the try. Now, there are times where one error causes an issue with the ruck defence, and then there are times where multiple issues cause errors in the ruck defence. South Africa here run an off-9 jack, with the carrier running his in-to-out line synonymous with Tony Brown attack, trying to narrow the defence, which in turn prompts a counter-ruck. Mero goes in here to slow the ball, but no one's listening to JVP, who is screaming for men here, because there's a huge hole that will be taken for pick and go, which is exactly what happens. This shows how dangerous it can be when multiple processes break down. England must start stopping this momentum at source, something reiterated by Jamie George after the Australia game in particular.
We're very proud of our defence. We massively believe in the system that we have. I think there's going to be, some clips that are difficult to watch back because we needed to be more physical and make our tackles more. And if we do that, then our defensive system becomes a lot easier.
Unfortunately, if you're English, the Aussies were able to break many tackles around the ruck. Tate McDermott in particular was an absolute terrier, showing footwork and just massive resolve and fight to get through these tackles and really to make ground where the Aussies shouldn't have been making ground. The Aussies are trying to narrow the defence. They go again quickly, hoping to draw more men into this area, but that's what they're trying to do, hitting around the pillar, trying to narrow that defence and drag more men from England into that contact area. Now, it's worked. England are massively short on the left-hand side of the field, and if Australia go quickly, they can make some ground, which they do. Ikitauri gathers, with only the agility and speed of Fei Waboso stopping him. However, Aussie are very, very alert here, and quick to take advantage of an England connection issue. Tate McDermott was electric in this game, taking the ball and scooting around the pillar defence, going through a huge hole, making a great initial break before linking up with Harry Wilson, who goes over for the try. Now the connection issue was down to Aussie work rate. If we have a look from the end-on angle, Manny does a great job at recovering the situation, but Cunningham South sets too early at key, leaving pillar and post to be filled by George and Martin. But the Aussie work rate is awesome, with multiple carriers arcing round to launch a blindside strike, which in turn, via their CBA fold policy, gets George and Martin starting to fold to cover it. Because Cunningham South holds his position, Tate McDermott sees the space opening before him and goes for it, creating a great initial break and eventual try. This scenario came about from those initial carries from Valentini and McDermott, however. It's a return to the Brumby style of play, those little elements of going up the guts and keeping it focused around the ruck coming back. I've written about this before, as I believe it would be very effective against modern defence. Australia showed the benefit of hard, powerful carries close to the ruck against disorganised ruck defences. It's like a dam bursting. If you can keep the pressure on and keep going before they're ready, then you can continually go up against weak shoulders and disorganised defences and thereby get ground where you shouldn't. Angus Bell, however, is very clever here. He goes up the guts and then uses footwork to get inside George, which in turn puts Ben O'Keefe between him and Cunningham South. This gives him a huge gain line as Cunningham South can't get to him in time, which in turn means further disorganised defences, and when the Wallabies spin it out, they score the try. Now, this is very clever, but the key thing is that unfortunately, folding errors have cost England wins this autumn. In the conclusive final try by Australia against England, the real damage was done with the folding errors. Now, the Wallabies continue to keep it tight. They know if they go outside 10, they can lose significant ground via the England blitz and therefore keep it up the guts, tight off-9 play. That is, at least, until the right moment. They continually run off-9, putting more men off-9 to ensure that they can secure their own ruck ball because England are going for the turnover as often as they can. Now it continues like this for a couple more phases. They're trying to get go forward, they're trying to keep the ball tight and to generate momentum to narrow that defence, after which they can then start thinking about going wide. Ollie Lawrence reloads to the near side, but the problem is that England are folding too many men over to deal with the expected attack. As we can see here, we have many men lined up against a pretty thinly orchestrated Australia attack. Now England have significant numbers and they are set, ready to launch hammer, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players ready to go. Now, unfortunately, this is too many, because Australia are rewinding their open side attack with multiple players on the far side getting back into position. And as such, it's easily dealt with this side, but the numbers are short on the far side of the field. Now, England fold 3 men over, which in midfield is actually fairly standard. However, what hasn't happened is they haven't been able to get wide and therefore give the defence width, which costs England dearly. Slady blitzes up to shut down the second receiver, but Aussie overloads Slightholme, in turn dragging in Marcus Smith as the last adjusting defender before releasing Jorgensen to score the try. Now, it's very easy here to lay the blame at Henry Slade, Ollie Slightholme and Marcus Smith's feet. However, the damage had already been done. By folding too many men over, they had left themselves short on the far side, which meant once Aussie reset back, this was the picture they had. Now technically, England have 6 men and as such can hammer, but Aussie are very clever here. The ball goes to Sakalaya Loto, who passes to Donaldson. Slady jams in on him, and Slightholme via SOP follows. However, Slightholme should have to handle 2 attackers. Aussie have overloaded him with 3. He has to adjust potentially 3 times, not just once. Aussie cement him into sitting down by getting to right via McWright. This shows the genius of Schmidt as they went for a winger very new to the system. Aussie don't just pass to right, which would make the read easier. Instead, they pass to McWright, who then forces Slightholme to sit down to account for him, therefore popping the ball quickly to Wright, who then can get around Ollie Slightholme. Forcing Slightholme to sit down means Wright can get round him. This in turn activates the jam from Marcus Smith, who needs to shoot in, as per the system. This in turn releases Jorgensen, and the scramble are too slow to get to him. Now, this may seem like it's the fault of Marcus Smith, but it's not. He is just doing the role in the system, and Joe knows it. You see, we know the damage was already done with the folding, but one thing that needed to happen was that the players needed to get wider. They needed more men on the inside so that the tackler and the adjusting defenders could get wider. Now, for anyone wanting to know more, I'd refer you to Charlie Morgan of The Telegraph, who I consider to be the best rugby journalist in the world and whose articles are loaded with brilliant clues and insights. Now, the clues that I got from his latest pieces are that England want to keep their line speed, but want to maintain greater connection. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of examples where I believe greater connection and width could have saved England tries, and as such, where Steve wants to take this defence. It's not about reducing the line speed, but more when and when not to do it. Now, England versus New Zealand 2024 was huge for me because it was the first chance of seeing what Joe El-Abd was going to do with our defence. Was he going to keep that Stormers defence? Was he going to operate the way that it had under Felix? And it took until 1637 to have it confirmed off set piece that we were running the Stormers defence. Off a scrum, the ball goes out to Barrett, who via Talea finds Ioane on the crash option up the 13 channel, who in turn knocks it on under pressure from Lawrence and Manny. Now this first phase showed everything: ferocious line speed, out to win defence and putting skill sets under pressure. We see the tackler adjusting defender spacing and that out to win blitz with Manny being able to take the short option in Ioane or the slice option in Jordan behind him. The ball in turn goes to Ioane and Manny and Lawrence converge on him, forcing the error. But even if Ioane got the offload away to Jordan here, Furbank, via that connection, is jamming in, thereby intending to smash Jordan should he receive the offload. This was a planned move with Jordan as the javelin option, but even though Ioane tries to get it away, Lawrence stops it happening. Now, as a fan, I was happy. I was so happy that Joe was committing to this defence. However, and this was a big however, it became clear as the series progressed that we needed to re-evaluate the balance between the blitzy 13 and the drifty 13. Now, we know that Felix picked Henry Slade to run his defence because he runs a very similar defence at Exeter. One key principle we must remember from this defence is that the 13 leads the line and the winger follows. The winger always follows the 13 and their lead. Now there are times where this gets the winger in trouble. In that last play against Aussie, Slady jams in on Donaldson and Slightholme has to follow him in. This reduced width and overloading of his channel means that Wright can get on the outside of him, which forces Marcus Smith to jam in as per the system, simply because you cannot risk Wright making the break. This hopefully shows why out-to-win positioning is so key. If you can get outside and make your hit, the outside guy doesn't come in. It is critical. Against New Zealand, we see Slady contest the ruck here and Genji fold round. Will Jordan ensures that Slady stays on the floor and out the game, therefore preventing him from reloading to the short side. This narrows the defence, meaning Marcus Smith has to come in and Talea is able to take the offload, beat the scramble and go over for the try. Now here, width was lost via ruck decision making. If Slady doesn't contest, he doesn't get pinned, he's able to fill in on this side and therefore Marcus Smith remains free. Therefore able to actually jam in on Talea and stop the break happening. Width and numbers have been a problem, with a great example being the disallowed South Africa try. Off first phase, they send Visa up the 10 channel, who makes the hit with Lawrence. England fold 3 over whilst Genji counteracts Khaleesi, and the 9 passes to Diolande, who passes over Lebok to Fassi, who gets outside Fremo. This forces Stewart in to cover Fassi, who then releases Aronsa for an easy run-in. Now, we know the Boks know this system better than anyone, and they use this knowledge to exploit it. If we look closer after first phase, we can see the free fold round and Genji contest. Now the England players are trying to get width, which is key as the Boks are manipulating England's own mechanisms against them. By placing de Allende flat, they know they can bait Slady forward to hit him. This in turn activates Fremo's blitz. Now Creel has been very clever. By moving progressively wider, he forces Fremo out with him as he knows Fremo needs to retain his out-to-in position. This means Fremo's blitz line to cover Creel is especially strong, resulting in him sitting down. This results in de Allende passing over Lebok, meaning again, South Africa overload one English adjusting defender against 3 opposition players. As Slady is blitzed, he in turn has taken himself out of the game. Now Fremo has to cover not only Creel's line, but Lebok's and Fassi's as well, overloading him with 3 players to mark. De Allende's pass goes over Lebok, meaning he has to readjust to try and get Fassi quickly, but Fassi is on such a lateral line he can get outside Fremo. Fremo does well to recover, but the doubt draws Steward, in turn freeing up Arensa for an easy run-in to get the try. Now whilst this shows the benefits of potentially being softer, Hammer is still critical. And if this team have 6+ men, they are still going to want to hammer and blitz off that line and cut down space and time as much as possible. It is ingrained into them now. They believe in it. It's part of their identity. But what Joe wants them to do is be better at knowing when to use it and when to not. Against Aussie, we see an example of the importance of the out-to-in positioning. Aussie truck up the 10 channel and Slady and Slightholme shoot out to get their width. Now when the ball goes out, Slady blitzes, which is a good call actually, but the ball goes out to Suwali, who manages to commit Furby and then manages to offload to Wright, who outraces the scramble, going in for a try in the corner. Now Aussie were able to do this because Suwali was able to take on Slightholme and get outside him. Ollie Slightholme is a sensational player. He is an outstanding player, but I would not be surprised if this is an area of his game he's been asked to work on with England, because he doesn't run this defence with Northampton. Now looking at their positioning, it's actually pretty good. Both Slady and Slightholme are outside their man, but when the pass goes to Suwali, he checks his run and manages to get outside Slightholme with footwork. This in turn changes Furbank's line. Furbank was originally on right, but Suwali's danger forces him to jam in on Suwali. The thing is, if this jam is done fast enough, it can pressure an error even at this stage. Alas, an error isn't forced and Wright goes over for a well-worked try. Now, Joe El-Abd knows that this part of his defence needs to improve, as does Steve. Not only the proper use of that out-to-in positioning, but also the use of the drifty 13 and when to connect and not blitz. A prime example is off turnover. The ball is moved wide and eventually finds its way to Deporte, who Slade blitzes out of the line to shut it down. This opens the 13 channel for Fiku, and Fremo, who's moved up with him, can't recover. This, in turn, results in an initial break for Fiku, which, with great support play, takes the ball to the line and scores the try. Now, in contrast, if we look at the Springboks on turnover, the ball is overthrown and Cowan Dickey takes it up. But if we have a look on the next phase, look at the actions of Jesse Creel. The ball goes to Marcus Smith, and the second the ball goes behind to Fremo, Creel checks his run. He immediately starts drifting, corner flagging even, trying to connect up with Colby to give him confidence to make that blitz if necessary. It's the defending and freeze principle, which you may remember from the Springboks attack video. But the key thing is that when the break is expected out wide, width and scramble is absolutely key. Now the good news, and there is good news, is that England have started employing this balance a little more, and that is something that Joe will be very, very happy with. It's all about knowing when and when not to. If we have a look at Slady here, look how early he starts pushing out Manny with this pass. This drift is all about giving Manny width, with which he can use his out-to-win hit on Will Jordan to make the tackle. Over the next couple of phases, however, England are a lot more blitzy, as they have the width and numbers, and New Zealand have no obvious overlap, meaning they can blitz up and catch the players behind the gain line. Finally, it results in the magnificent out-to-win blitz by Chandler Cunningham South, which forces the knock-on, ending the play and granting England the scrum. This shows how England are mixing drifty and blitzy, but drifty, once it gets width, can become blitzy. It's also something that's being learned by other players, not just Slady. If you have a look at England here, off turnover, Fremo realises the blitz isn't on and calls the jam, with him drifting underneath immediately and Roebuck slamming down on de Allende. This is called back. This blitz and scramble underneath is a great understanding via Freeman of what's needed at this point. In an excellent example against New Zealand, I want you to watch Manny Faye-Waboso. New Zealand run a variation of their sweep move, with Slady pushing Manny off to get width. Now he goes drifty, 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 and then once he's outside, goes blitzy. Talea manages to get the offload away to Will Jordan, but Furbank is coming in from the backfield and he's coming in hard in his out-to-win jam. He comes in and nails Jordan, driving him back and containing the threat. This is a critical system that England have learned and they need to keep honing it. However, there are things that haven't really been fully developed yet, one of which is reloading. Reloading is a key principle we discussed in Wibble Rugby the final, where in order to maintain width and numbers, South Africa will fold backs under the line from one side of the field to the other in order to adjust their 3-2 back split and ensure numbers and width on the far side. It only doesn't work in this case as Scotland go wide, not giving South Africa time to reload their backs into position, which results in the try. Against Wales, we see similar processes in action. South Africa stop Wales and Creel as defensive captain shifts out Pollard as the far side is at risk. As such, Pollard and co start their run with Wales playing off 9, which in turn grants South Africa time via tackling and slow ball. By the time the ball is out on next phase, Pollard and co are getting back into position ready to defend. This is critical, as England could have used it before. Over summer against New Zealand, England run a clearing box kick and New Zealand run it back. A great DA option finds Leonard Brown, who is tackled by Smith, with 3 backs joining him. These are Fremo, Slady and Mitchell, who all try to contribute in some way to the counter-ruck, with Ollie Lawrence also joining, meaning we have 4 backs on this side, not including Smith. New Zealand are set to run a full-width attack and run off 9 to prepare. Now here, we should see Slady moving behind the defensive line, getting into position to plug that 13 channel, because Manife Reboso by himself out there is quite isolated. He could also deploy any one of Mitchell or Lawrence, but the point is this channel is very, very open. And as such, whilst Mitchell could also move over, they need more men here. Now Chandler, Cunningham South and Manife Reboso combine here brilliantly to snuff out the threat, but again, the lack of backs on the far side now is a massive problem. Up against Finn Baxter and Freddie Stewart, Stewart doesn't jam in like he's meant to, opening the channel for Barrett, who takes the gap, and then it's an easy run into the line with Talea in support. Now, in the most recent Autumn Internationals, South Africa show a great example of this. Off a restart return, England regather and get set into their attack. Now they try to keep the ball alive and keep the attack going, with Cunningham South making a great carry, but South Africa are centre splitted, meaning de-Allende is defending the near side and Creel the far side. De-Allende in turn does a great job running drifty here, connecting up with Colby, which forces Lawrence back in. England retain quick ball, with Marcus Smith shooting an inside ball to Sam Underhill. Now look at the actions of Damien de-Allende here. The far side is undermanned and thereby he starts reloading. This reload is absolutely critical, as it turns out that he ends up going into the 13 channel as it's being attacked. This allows Creel to blitz and eventually forces an error in combination with Arendse. De-Allende's interjection here was absolutely critical, and we know what happens now. We get a scrum, and we know what happens when South Africans scrum. They usually get penalties, and they do get that here. The point I'm really trying to stress here is that it's hard to judge this defence before its development is finished. It's like taking a pizza out of the oven before it's ready and serving it to customers. It's just not something you'd do. You'd put it back in the oven. The eventual plan is very clear with Steve. He wants a defence that will force errors and knock-ons and mistakes, which is exactly what we see here. New Zealand send Ioane up the 13 channel, but Lawrence forces a knock-on. Now this is exactly what Steve wants. It's exactly what England want. This gives England the scrum, with which the sensational Will Stewart 2.0 wins the penalty, allowing England to clear their lines and get upfield. Remember, in Wibble Rugby the New England Way, we discussed the scrum developments and what England were doing to move their scrum forward from the under-20s all the way to the senior team. The question being asked at the moment, however, is whether England can perform this game. Now, they can, because they have started to win scrum penalties at a far greater rate than they have in the past couple of years. As we know, this is the clear game plan of England. They want to create pressure at all times via their defence, via their kicking game and via their attack. This in turn results in more upfield positions, which in turn results in more opportunities to score. Now the set piece is a bedrock to this occurring, which is why it is looking very promising for the future. You see, Conor O'Shea and his development pipelines, in combination with Steve Borthwick and his reinstatement of the English style in England A and England Under-20, will prove very successful for the long-term success of England rugby. It's not even about the recent World Cup win, but more about the alignment between the teams, where Hayden Thomas's appointment has meant that there is a pipeline between the Under-20s, England A and the England seniors. But it's not just about alignment in their defence, even though this is an absolutely critical part of their game, but it's also an alignment in their scrummaging power. As mentioned in Wibble Rugby the New England Way and in a brilliant article by Charlie Morgan, the RFU and Jonathan Pendlebury have established scrum camps to build the next generation of Type 5 technically gifted players. The goal being that all future players who are part of these systems, when they come through, can contribute to the English style. It starts for an under-20s player in being trained in that Stormers defence, with Hayden Thomas, having learnt it from Omar Munamni, coaching his own adaptive version of it, being able to run blitzy and drifty all in one passage of play. But also remembering that hammer is absolutely king when you have width and numbers. The main point, however, was that it proved so effective at stopping tries and forcing constant knock-ons in the opposition. Steve saw an opportunity, promoting Hayden Thomas up to the England A team, where he would be able to work with players who are on the fringes of England's selection, imparting this knowledge of the same defence system being used in the England senior team. If you wanted to create a guide on how to become an England player, this is it, having the same principles and defence system used all throughout the under-20s, England A and England seniors leads to a 3 to 4 year pipeline of development. This means that any England player who has gone through this pathway on his debut can slot in seamlessly, knowing the systems and principles in play already. Now, the other stage of development is of course the scrum, and if it comes back to the scrum, England want to be able to dominate and win penalties like they did against New Zealand, like they did against Wales, so on and so forth. That is the future, and in the England under-20s camp, Steve knows he has some players who can certainly contribute towards this vision. Now, it must be noted that there is no guarantee that the guys at this level may make it. Success at under-20s does not always translate to Prem level. However, there are players from the under-20s who are currently ripping it up at Prem level, like Henry Pollock, like Asher Opoku-Forjo and Afolasi Fasogbon. This neglects to mention Junior Kapoku at Racing 92 as well. They are all fighters, all of them are grizzled and very hardened and eager young men. And under Jonathan Pendlebury, we got to remember what they love more than anything. They love scrummaging. Remember, the Type 5 camps via education and conditioning are designed to build technically gifted, immensely powerful scrummaging athletes. More importantly, they're intended to drill these behaviours in the players as part of their regimen going forward. Now, has it had an impact? Well, let's see if my favourite piece of South African commentary of all time can reflect whether it has or not.
Scrum time. What did France say about the scrum at the break? Are they going to combat this big effort? They're not.
Advantage. Not at all. Struggling to deal with the dominance. England win yet another penalty on the back of their scrum.
Like the seniors, the under-20s boys are scrummagers first, then loose second. The England under-20s scrum is the Springboks scrum of the senior world, where they're able to win penalties against their own putting quite dominantly. Now, I must reiterate, not everyone at England under-20s will go on to dominate the senior game like this team are doing in the under-20s league. The first 10 games of a Type 5 under-20s player at Prem level are a huge learning experience. So many times in the past, England under-20s players have just faded into obscurity because they weren't getting the right amount of game time. But now, that's changed, with England's under-20 players starring in the Premiership and also in the top 14. This is all about setting the foundation, the culture and the good habits for what these players are meant to become. They're meant to become scrummagers and match winners and test match animals. I can't remember the last time I saw a player strut like this over to a scrum, but I'm glad he did. It's all about developing this pipeline. Conor O'Shea and Steve Borthwick have aligned this pipeline to produce the right type of athlete and player for the England senior team. These players were dominating at under-20s level because of these principles. Look at the England coaching box and then look at the French coaching box in comparison just before a 5-metre scrum. The difference in body language is palpable. France know what's coming, but they can't stop it. They can't stop it and they concede a penalty, eventually conceding a try. Now, when this performance and these players start filtering into the seniors, there needs to be a coach there who can condition and work them along these principles to continue that dominance into senior level. Steve is that man because the implementation of these principles throughout the pipeline was his and Conor O'Shea's idea. I know that people can get very frustrated about England performances. I am a proud Englishman and I get frustrated as well, but you have to remember that in all of these performances, with everything against them, they were in every single one of them. They were in the fight. This is with the loss of key coaching staff in Felix Jones and Aled Walters, who are crucial to their defence, with a new guy coaching the defence who was also learning it on the job, and if we think about it as well, without a proper strength and conditioning coach who can actually develop their fitness in line with this defence. This neglects to mention the loss of players like Alex Mitchell, with whom the England performances are just another level. Now, regardless of all of this, I know that fans, players and coaches alike would not have been impressed or happy with the unforced errors. These were coach killers, and these errors were not normal in England performances. Now, I don't know for sure, obviously, otherwise I would be up here on a TED Talk, but I significantly believe that a lot of these errors were down to physical conditioning. which in turn can affect your mental conditioning. One of my heroes, Major Dick Winters of Easy Company, said that physical stamina is at the root of mental toughness. This is because it's a lot easier to think clearly, remain motivated and stay in the fight when you're not exhausted. Steve noted that the England players' conditioning was not at a level required to run this defence and thereby play the England way. Now this has been addressed with the hiring of Phil Morrow, but in the autumn there was a lot of turmoil with only one S&C coach in Dan Tobin part of the setup. The simple fact is that Steve almost had two hands tied behind his back. But the plan is good. The plan, the vision, the future is good. These results were really closely run by Japan. Even with all the absences in camp, the vitriol from the media, and the fitness of the players, England still should have won some of these games. They were in the game, they were in the fight against battle-hardened rugby championship conditioned sides until the end. Now the players know this isn't good enough, but if they did this well despite all the aforementioned reasons, imagine how good they can do when they're ready. This team, these players have such a high ceiling, it's unbelievable. They can achieve this greatness, but they need more aging. They need more time learning the systems. They need more time in the saddle because what Steve is building could win us the 27 World Cup. A lot will be revealed this Six Nations, and with the fixes that Steve and co are implementing, we may start seeing something pretty special. The plan is good, the vision is good. Steve just needs realistic time to make these dreams of so many England fans, the new reality. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, all that kind of jazz. If you really liked it and you want to buy me a beer, no pressure to, but I'm not going to say no. But that was a long one. You know, they've been quite long recently, my videos, longer than the usual, like 30, 40 minutes, you know, and that's because there's just been so much evolution in the teams that I've been watching. You know, you can see what's changing. You can see the dynamics coming through and what they're doing going forward. And it's really been a fascinating, it's really, really good time to be a rugby player, rugby fan. But yeah, at the moment, I think that, you know, one thing that I really want to focus on is that I didn't really focus on in the video is that obviously I think the defence is going to adapt, you know, and it was the main focus after the autumn because that is obviously what most people want to see and want to understand about what the changes are going to look like. One area that I haven't really looked at as much though is the attack because I am literally so positive that A, in particular, is going to really, really improve for England, this Six Nations. I believe that it's kind of become a bit more prevalent, just the way that the players are talking, the way that the coaching staff are talking, and in particular, certain things they were doing, like all last autumn and last year, actually, they've been employing something called the CT runners, which is when a player takes the, you know, ball off, you know, a carrier's shoulder who's been tackled. Even if there's hardly any chance that the offload is going to get away, they are a support runner before they're coming in as a cleaner. That's something that I've noted that England have really started doing, and it's something that I think we may start to see the benefits of coming over this Six Nations, which next weekend. Cannot wait. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I am about to go to the pub. You know, it's the weekend before the Six Nations. I've got to work tomorrow. So, yeah, opportunity. But, yeah, and like I say, I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, guys, and good luck on the weekend. Well, next weekend. Right, go well.